Everybody? Now, welcome, welcome. We're a little more formal today, being up here for this talk. We might prefer to be down there, but we're going to be broadcasting this and recording this. So that's the best way for us to do it. So I am so pleased to have Rabbi Sandmel back today. He did a bang-up job last time. And I did the math and figured out that you did our daughter's naming in, wait a minute, I had it, 92. That was it. 92? Is that right? Yeah. Yeah, 84, 88, 92, yeah. I think he had said something really strange like 2015 or something last time. But anyway. That's corrected. And we were here, and we had a lovely naming with David leading everything. It was beautiful. So today, we're going to look at a very difficult subject, Zionism. And I think we have the expert here in David and the communicator here in David to talk about it intelligently, you know, and hopefully you'll feel free to ask the questions you want to ask. Should I say that? Yeah, okay. David is the... David may choose to answer them or not, but no. David is the new president of the International Council of Christians and Jews. And he's been working for, how long now? Yeah, a long, long time in the whole Christian-Jewish dialogue. So he's written books about it, and he's been at different organizations heading them up. And this has been his forte for many, many years. Back in 1992, he was the rabbi of the Reformed Synagogue in Portland, and that's how we first met him. Anyway, I'm delighted to see everybody here. I'm delighted to introduce Rabbi David Sandmel.
Well, thank you. Okay, so I should share my screen now, is that okay? All right. Share screen. That's not what, is it? Okay, hold on here. Wait. No, I stopped share screen, okay. Okay, now let me get that out of the way. Is that working? Can you see it?
Oh, we can see it. What is Zionism in blue?
What is Zionisms in blue? Wait, I can go to, wait, this meeting is being recorded. That's okay. View.
Hold on. Is there, sorry, could you click on the thing?
On which?
On the keynote. Okay. Now, just see when you mouse over to the top. You see that? Green?
With that?
Yeah, make it full screen. Yeah, perfect.
Oh, amazing. Okay. Whoop. Let's see what else I can do here. Good afternoon. Moadim l'simcha. Happy Sukkot. It is wonderful to be back here in Biddeford at Etz Chaim. It might be more wonderful to talk about a different topic. But on the other hand, this is a very timely topic. The first thing that you will probably see if you're looking at the screen is that there is an extra S in there. And that is probably the sort of foundation of what I'm going to be talking about. And that is that the word Zionism means many different things to different people and has done so at different points in history. And I'm going to take a look at that a little bit so that we can understand what's going on in some of the discourse today and what does it mean if someone says I'm anti-Zionist, or what are the different things it can mean if someone says that. And I'll also take a look at different forms or expressions of Zionism within the Jewish community. I'll take a very brief look at the phenomenon of Christian Zionism. I'm going to take a look at some of the critiques of Zionism. And my goal is, at the end, that you will walk out and you will be completely confused and not know what the heck Zionism is. Now, there is a generally but not universally accepted, and again, let me just say two other things. Any comment I've worked on this presentation. I think it's pretty good. Someone else who was invited to do the same presentation would do it completely differently and would probably take issue with much of what I am going to say. So I just want to acknowledge that. The other thing is that I'm going to try to cover a lot of territory, which means that I'm not going to be able to go deep or into detail. So much of what I say probably needs more explanation, but I'm just not going to be able to do that. So again, I hope you'll bear with me. So, so there is this generally but not universally accepted definition of Zionism, the belief that the Jewish people should practice self-determination in their ancestral homeland. Okay, so that doesn't get you very far. That's very broad, right? And we're going to see how that is now. We're going to see how that's kind of understood, changed, and so forth. My awkward plural here is again to underline the many different ways that this word has been used. Okay, so Nathan Birnbaum. I'm sure you've all heard of Nathan Birnbaum, right? Me and Nate were like this. I shouldn't be so flip. Nathan Birnbaum is actually credited with the first use of the word Zionist and Zionism in 1890, okay? Which on the one hand is a long time ago, but in terms of Jewish history is not very long ago. And so my question here is, how did a word which did not even exist for most of Jewish history become such an essential and controversial term? So in order to do this, and now I get to really nerd out for you, so I hope you'll bear with me here, we have to take a look at the word Zion, Zion in Hebrew, and the various ways that that has been understood. And we'll come back to you a little bit later, Nate, I promise. So the word Zion, of course, is a word that we find in the Tanakh, in the Bible. In fact, we find the word Zion 161 times, okay? 0 in Torah, 42 times in Psalms, and then the rest scattered primarily through the prophetic books, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Joel, etc. One of the things we're going to see is that Zion is often paired with Jerusalem. I'm going to say in a minute it's another word for Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the word Jerusalem appears 900 times. Okay? So I think you're getting a sense where I'm going here. So what are the various, let me make sure I didn't skip a slide. No, I did, okay. What are the various meanings of the word Zion? First of all, Zion can be Jerusalem or parts of it. A few verses here, Psalm 48, 13 to 14. Walk around Zion, circle it, count its towers, take note of its ramparts, go through its citadels, that you may recount it to a future age. Or Isaiah and Micah, the same verse, which if you have been in synagogue over the past few weeks, you have heard many times. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah u'dvar Adonai miYerushalayim. For instruction, or Torah, will go forth from Zion, the word of God from Jerusalem. Or Isaiah 62, for the sake of Zion, I will not be silent. For the sake of Jerusalem, I will not be quiet. I could take the next, 15, 20 minutes giving you every verse. I'm resisting that temptation. So let me move on here. So Zion is Jerusalem. To be more specific, Zion refers to Har Zion, Mount Zion, which is where the temple was built. Psalm 132, for the Eternal has chosen Zion. God has desired it for God's seat. This is my resting place for all time. So Har Zion, the temple in Jerusalem, is where God dwells. It's also known in Hebrew as a Mishkan. Mishkan is the same Hebrew word as Shekhinah, the presence of God. God dwells in God's house on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Zion is the people of Israel. Okay? I who planted the earth and made firm skies and made from the earth have said to Zion, you are my people. Okay? And Zion is the land. Assuredly, thus says Isaiah again, assuredly, thus says the eternal God of hosts, O my people that dwells in Zion. Okay? So, what we have, and again, I'm sorry for running through this so quickly, but we've got the word Zion, Zion, meaning Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, more specifically the Temple Mount, the place where God dwells, the people of Israel, and the land of Israel. It has all of those resonances. So now I want us to take a look at the word Zion within the context of two threads that run through the entire Tanakh. The concept of covenant, and then the theme of return and exile. Okay? I'm going to assume I have to remember which device I need to touch to move my slides forward. So, covenant, beginning with Abraham. I will be your God. I will give you this land. You're going to have lots of descendants. That's the basis of the covenant. I just paraphrased from Genesis 17 there. So, so we have that, and you know, Abraham's given this land, and then what we see is they're in the land, they're out of the land, they're in the land, they're out of the land. You know, God brings Abraham to the land. Then Abraham has to go down into Egypt. Okay? Then he comes back. A couple generations, Jacob and his sons go down to Egypt. They hang out there for 450 years. Moses brings them out, right? Then the Babylonians, I mean, I'm shortening history here. There's a lot in the way. Then the Babylonians come in the 6th century and destroy the temple in Jerusalem and exile at least the leadership elite to Babylonia, where, amazingly, they return. Cyrus the Persian conquers the Babylonians, and at the end of the book of 2nd Chronicles, Cyrus, who is described as an anointed of God, Mashiach, Messiah, allows the people to go back up to Jerusalem, and that's what we see in this verse from Ezekiel, the verse, you know, the dry bones. Some people read it as resurrection, but I think in context, it had more to do with national resurrection than actually physical, bodily resurrection. And so what we have is this pattern where, first of all, we have a covenant, and as part of that covenant, wherever the Jewish people may end up, God will eventually bring them back to the land. And that is really at the center, in the sense of the narrative of the Tanakh, and deeply connected to the concept of covenant. And then, in the year 70 of the Common Era, there's another destruction of the Romans, of the temple in Jerusalem, this time the Second Temple, and an exile. Jews are not completely emptied out of the land, but many of them move to different parts of the world. This is the continuation of the growth of the diaspora. But here's what happened, though. You see, that happened, and the people said, well, wait, we've been out of the land before, and we came back. We're going to come back again. We know that we're going to come back again because that's what God promises. That's what God does. When the Messiah comes, and now we have the idea of Messiah coming in, the Son of David, right, will reestablish the ancient kingdom, a mythic golden age, gather the rebuild the temple, gather the exiles from the four corners of the earth, and establish a reign of peace and justice under the rule of Malchut Shamayim, under the sovereignty of God. Sorry. It's a utopian vision, and I'm using this phrase utopian vision because I'm going to use it again, and I'm trying to make some connections here. So this idea of a messianic age, a return to sovereignty, a utopian era of peace and so forth, is deeply built in to the Judaism that many of us have inherited, that rabbinic Judaism that emerged out of the First Temple period. And it is this idea of return to Zion is just woven through the rabbinic material. Again, this is something that if you've been in synagogue over the past few weeks, you've said several times, may we witness your return, merciful return to Zion. Praised are you, Adonai, who restores God's presence to Zion. I started preparing this presentation before the high holidays, and I'm sitting there in synagogue, and every time the word Zion pops up, says, oh, maybe I should quote that. Maybe I should. I would, again, too many quotations, okay? The Talmud and the Midrash is full of laws and legends about Zion, about the land, about the return to Zion, about the Messiah and what it's going to be like in the Messianic days. And Jewish folklore is full of it too. And so this is an idea that really spoke to Jews living in diaspora, and especially when you layer on that the nature of diasporic existence, which was, and again, this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but powerlessness, vulnerability, right? The precariousness of life, okay? Right now, the Duke's letting us live in his duchy, but next week he may throw us all out. Or the Crusaders are going to come through and massacre, you know. So this idea about independence, you can see how that might resonate, right? Okay, again, I told you I'm rushing through a lot of stuff here. I've given you sort of the biblical image, I've given you the traditional rabbinic image, and now we're going to take a look at what happens when that runs into modernity, okay? I beg your pardon? What? My mouse up on the slide. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so we have the modern era. We have things like the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, the scientific critique of religion, concepts of democracy coming out of the French Revolution, the American Revolution, concepts of individual autonomy. All of these challenged not only traditional Jewish beliefs, but generally traditional religious beliefs in the Western world, and the Jews are part of that. And of course, they respond, right? And they respond in many ways. These are just some of them, not all of them. Various types of expressions of Jewish religion, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. These primarily emerge in Western Europe. Reform traces its roots back to the earliest part of the 19th century in Germany. It wasn't until someone said, hey, I'm a Reform Jew, that someone said, well, wait, I'm an Orthodox Jew. You're just a Jew. I know, what do I know from? And then people started needing these labels, right? So the Reformers, and part of what all three of these groups were doing was attempting to find a way to continue to live Jewishly in a majority non-Jewish society that was beginning in some ways to open up, right? Ideas of citizenship, individual rights, freedom of worship, and so forth. So that, people say, well, what can we do to take advantage of this? And there are various different. Again, I will try not to go too far down that rabbit hole as well, but we see especially these sort of religious responses primarily in Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, you have a very different scene, and there you have, again, in the 19th century and then in the early 20th century, the emergence of socialism and communism, both of which, again, are utopian visions. And there's a sense in which I would even go back and say that the religious reforms were also perhaps utopian with a lowercase u. It's like the world is becoming a better place. How can we take advantage of it? In Eastern Europe, socialism, how can we create this utopian socialist society where everybody gets according to their needs from everybody who according to their ability? Wasn't that the phrase? I may have turned it around a little bit. And Jews were really deeply attracted to this kind of movement because it was a sort of secular utopian messianism. Okay? They may have ceased to believe that God was going to send the Messiah, but that didn't mean that they couldn't dream of something that could be a messianic, in quotation marks, age. And we see this in socialism, and we see this in communism. And of course, one of the things that's happening, though, is, for example, in Germany, while they're trying to figure out what does it mean to be a German, many folks said, well, a Jew can't be a German. That's where we get the word anti-Semitism. In the political movements of the late 19th century in Germany, it was, it had to do with, what is the essence of Germanness? And a Jew certainly could not share in that, right? And then, oh, that's interesting. Okay. There we go. And then we have nationalism. Okay? Again, primarily in the East, the idea that, that nations or peoples can advocate for self-sovereignty in their homelands, right? And we see this in, among Ukrainians, Lithuanians, Latvians, all the different peoples that were first part of the Russian Empire and then are part of this emerging, what then eventually emerges as the Soviet Union. But they each, they had land, they had culture, they had language, and they said, well, we don't want to be controlled. We want to be independent. We want to control our own destiny, right? But of course, like people in Germany, many of the people in Eastern Europe, these different peoples, when they thought about what it meant to be a Lithuanian or a Latvian or a Ukrainian or whatever, didn't include Jews, right? They weren't included in that. And the Jews said, and so you can imagine the Jews saying, wait, all of these people, right? They're saying that they're a nation and they're trying to establish independence. Well, we're a nation. We have a homeland. We have a language. We have a culture. We may not be in that homeland, but, we'll deal with that problem later. We should have our own nation state where our people can be free, can develop their own culture, can speak their own language. And remember, the revitalization of Hebrew is one of the great achievements of the Zionist movement. And so Zionism, as a specific type of Jewish nationalism, is also a utopian messianic vision, because it will enable, if it is realized, it would enable Jews to be free, to be in control of their own destiny, and not to be at the mercy of the majority cultures in which they lived. Okay, so all of this is going on in the late 19th and into the early 20th century in parts of Europe. And it brings us to, finally, I have a real picture of something up here, right? Not just words. The first Zionist Congress in 1897 in Basel, okay? The word Zionism didn't even exist until 7 years earlier, and now they're having a Congress, and of course we have Theodor Herzl in the middle, and it's our buddy Nate Birnbaum. You remember him, right, from the first slide? Now, what a crazy idea, okay? The Jews are going to establish a country? Give me a break. They have no army. They have almost no political power. The land happens to be controlled by the Ottoman Empire. There happen to be people living there, right? So there are two questions then that come up. First of all, the practical side of how do you establish a state? You know, I mean, think about it, right? How do you do that? And then, and this is really the more important question for today, what kind of state will it be? And guess what? Jews didn't agree. I knew that would get a little bit of a laugh. So, just to give you an example, these are some types of Zionism. Political Zionism, cultural Zionism, revisionist Zionism, labor Zionism, religious Zionism. There are more, but let's just start with these. All right? Political Zionism. There's Theodore Herzl again. Love that beard. Political Zionism is very closely linked to Theodore Herzl. He considered the Jewish problem, the problem of Jews living in Europe as a minority, persecuted and so forth. He considered it a political problem that could be solved by overt action in the international arena. His aim was to obtain a charter recognized by world leadership, granting the Jews sovereignty in a Jewish-owned homeland. And at this Basel conference, they put forth a Basel program whose aim was, quote, to secure a haven under public law for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. And then they set about doing some of the practical stuff, right? They had organizational and economic mechanisms, the Zionist organization, the Jewish Colonial Trust, and so they got stuff started. They were actually taking positive practical steps. So political Zionism. Then we have cultural or spiritual Zionism. This is Asher Ginsburg, better known as Achad Ha'am, his pen name, meaning one of the people. And he thought the problem was not necessarily land and sovereignty, but Judaism, which he believed had lost its spiritual assets, its sources of creative and natural might. He didn't believe that Palestine could accommodate all of Jewry, and so he didn't think a Jewish state would solve all the problems. He still supported a Jewish state, but it should be a national or an international spiritual center that would then have spokes going out to the other communities, and it would enrich them and so forth. You know, that was, so he argued for an extensive and continuing educational activity among Jews and moderate settlement activity in Palestine. However, he was one of the people right at the forefront of renewing the Hebrew language, because language is one of the carriers of culture, right? And so he wanted to turn it into a modern, living language. So we've got political Zionism, we've got cultural or spiritual Zionism, we have revisionist Zionism. Does not look like a fun guy to hang out with, does it? This is Zev Jabotinsky. Jabotinsky is the person credited with revisionist Zionism. He established it in 1925. It was very militaristic. And was very focused on the territorial integrity of a Jewish homeland over all, notice this, all British Mandate Palestine, which included much on the east side of the Jordan River. And it was a major competitor with one that I'm going to talk about in a moment, labor Zionism. And revisionism morphs into what is now the Likud, okay, the party of Benjamin Netanyahu, which at this point is the largest party in the Knesset. Okay? All right. Labor Zionism, and I love this poster. I mean, it speaks so much to the ethos of these folks. Founded in the early 1900s, Labor Zionist was influenced by socialist principles, specifically that a Jewish homeland could only be created based on the collective efforts of the Jewish working class. Anybody ever heard of a kibbutz? Okay. The current Labor Party, which is now a shadow of its former self, but which was the majority party in Israel for many years, emerges out of this particular perspective. And that's why at least, and Ben-Gurion comes out of this, and this is why at least initially Israel was a socialist country with socialized medicine and so forth. Okay, one more, religious Zionism. Now, when the Zionism becomes a topic, many religious Jews, Orthodox Jews, opposed it, believing that the return to Zion would only come about in the days of the Messiah. It would be a miracle brought about by God, and any steps that we might take to do that ourselves are an expression of a lack of faith, and in fact will postpone the coming of the Messiah. Okay? These folks established a party called the Mizrahi Party, Merkaz Ruchani, a spiritual center. They rejected the absolute opposition to Zionism and believed that settlement in the land of Israel, even by non-religious Jews, was a beginning of the process of redemption. Okay? They also believed that the state had to be governed by not only Jewish values, but Jewish law, okay? And you can see, I mean, as I'm saying this, how these folks, can you imagine getting all these folks in a room? Probably sound like any synagogue board meeting, right? So we've got these very different perspectives, and this religious Zionism is going to play an increasingly important role, and we'll see that in a moment. All of these groups that I've mentioned, they were all working on like building infrastructure and all of this kind of stuff, but they were arguing over how to achieve the Jewish state, just not even practical steps, what do we do, but also what kind of state should it be? All right, and these, and just, you know, imagine, we're going to have a state, state's not here yet. What's it going to be like? Is it going to be socialist? Is it going to be religious? You can imagine the debates, and this was a time of ideology, right? This was a time in which people were very taken up with their ideology, unlike, never mind. No, we'll leave that. Oh, by the way, this is Rabbi Abraham Yitzhak HaKohen Cook, Harav Cook. When I lived on kibbutz, you'll forgive me, this is a real tangent. I worked in the kitchen preparing meals. They called me Harav Cook. So, thank you very much. Okay, so we have all of these people. They're trying to set up an infrastructure. They're having ideological arguments about forms of government and rights and, you know, all of these things. And then 1948, May 14th, 1948, the state of Israel is born. And all of a sudden, things, I mean, again, I'm simplifying, moves from theory to reality, to practice. So if Zionism was the movement to establish Jewish autonomy in the land of Israel, it succeeded. It's done, right? Zionism, you know, at least that form of Zionism has achieved its goal. So Zionism, then, what people understood to be of Zionism, has to shift. And it shifts from being the goal of establishing a state to supporting the state, okay? In the diaspora, what can we do to support the state of Israel. In Israel, guess what? The arguments keep going. What kind of state should we be? Right? So, in some ways, May 14th changed everything. In other ways, Jews are going to argue. Right? This is what we do. Now, so here's where, again, we get into some issues. Zionism, does Zionism mean that am I a Zionist because I support the state of Israel? Or is Zionism the policies of the government of Israel? I'm just throwing out a couple, what does this word mean now? And let's keep in mind as well that in 1948, the new state did not have sovereignty over Jerusalem. It did not control Har Zion, right? Nor did it control biblical Israel, what Jews might refer to as Judea and Samaria, the two, what is now mostly the West Bank. But that's where Bethlehem, Hebron, it's where most of the action in the Bible takes place, is in the West Bank, not in what is today sort of the modern state of Israel. So for some people, of course, hey, we've got a state, we're independent, I'm good. Then for others, hey, we got a state, that's good, but we don't have the homeland yet. We got to do something about that. Again, so you can see how these visions of Zionism are going to compete with one another. Okay, I told you I'm zipping through history here. I left out the Suez conflict altogether. 6-Day War. That's Chief Rabbi Goren at the Western Wall. It's not the best picture, towards after the Western Wall had been captured. And all of a sudden, Israel finds itself in control of the West Bank and Jerusalem. This is what I think Gershom Gorenberg referred to as the accidental empire in a book that he wrote. It's like, so now, especially for those who have this particular religious messianic approach, Jews now control Jerusalem and all of the holy sites and the West Bank. If you are looking for the signs of the coming of the Messiah, what more could you ask for? Right? And so, again, you'll notice I'm leaving out a lot of history here, but this is where we see the beginning of the settler movement. There are, first of all, because the land was then available, right? Rabbi Cook's son, Tzvi Yehuda Cook, continued his father's ideology and became one of the spiritual leaders of the settlement movement. Now, there are various reasons why Israeli Jews might move into a settlement. Some might move into a settlement, say one of the ones right around Jerusalem, because there were government subsidies and you could get a house there for 60% of what you would pay for it inside the Green Line. And it's a Zionist thing to do, to live in the land and and in security. Or you might say, I am a Jew, God gave this land to me, and Abraham bought the cave at Machpelah from Ephraim the Hittite. It belongs to us, and I'm going to settle in Hebron. Okay? Now, those are both Zionist responses. One is religious, one is more sort of patriotic. Another Zionist response might be, we have a land, we don't need this land, it's only going to be a problem. What's really good for Israel is to have a good border. These are all Zionist positions, okay? Now, again, this is the chart on the right-hand side shows you the political parties in the most recent Knesset, the Knesset that was elected in 2022. And the main reason that I put this up here is to show you how many parties there are. There are 13 parties that made it over the threshold to be parties in the Knesset. Now, 3 of those parties are parties that are identified with the Arab community and are probably not Zionist. or at least non-Zionist. That means that 90%, the other 10 parties, are all Zionist parties, and they all disagree with one another. Okay? The little picture on the bottom there, which again may be a little bit hard to see, this is Tel Aviv. This is from a year ago, September, before the war started, when every Saturday night in Tel Aviv, hundreds of thousands of Israelis were showing up to protest what they saw as a corrupt judicial reform, okay? Pouring out into the streets. They have a certain Zionist image. They probably didn't all agree with each other, but they had certainly agreed on one aspect in terms of what kind of a country and court system should be. It's a Zionist issue, and they're out there in great numbers. Again, just showing the divisions that are going on here. Okay. A few things about American Jews and Zionism, or at least about American Jews in Israel. This is from the Pew study in 2021, so it precedes the current conflict. 1/4 of American Jews have lived in Israel or been there more than once. Most U.S. Jews are emotionally attached to Israel. 8 in 10 Jews say caring about Israel is an important or essential part of what being Jewish means to them. Among U.S. Jews, 57% say they follow news about Israel at least somewhat closely. I will confess that I follow Israeli news somewhat closely, but in the last 13 months or so, I still follow the news, but I can only read so much of it, and then I can't take it anymore. Now, since October 7th, there have been some other surveys. One of them, by the American Jewish Committee, found that 45% of American Jews said after the war they feel more connected to Israel. I would say during the war. 48% they said they felt more connected to their Jewish identity, including 20% who said much more. Now, how much of that is connected to the war itself or to the anti-Semitism that we've seen in the United States? But again, I think it's worth sharing, again, and it's one study, and don't believe the polls. So just, just a moment of hesitation in there. And we're also seeing this shift among younger Jews as well, though it's actually going in sort of both directions. I'll say a little bit more about this in a moment. But what we get from this is that the vast majority of American Jews feel some sort of connection, positive connection to the state of Israel. Now, the question is whether they would define themselves as Zionist, right? And this, I saw this is a study from Great Britain, I think, is that the number of people who are now willing to identify themselves as Zionist has dropped somewhat. The support and connection to the state of Israel has not. So the word itself, in the context of the debate and the dissension around the term, is having an effect. It seems not in general to be having an effect on people's attitudes. However, I do have to say a word about Jewish anti-Zionism. And there is anti-Zionism in the Jewish community. There has always been anti-Zionism in the Jewish community. It's not a new thing. And there's always been anti-Zionism from both the right and from the left, though I think it's right and left, but that's okay. I'm not real good with left and right. Janet will tell you that. The top picture is a group called the Neturei Karta. The Neturei Karta are ultra-Orthodox Jews who feel very strongly that the existence of the state of Israel is postponing the coming of the Messiah. And you'll see that here we have this guy looking like an ultra-Orthodox Jew rejecting Zionism. It probably should say Judaism rejects Zionism, but we'll leave the editing for right now. Standing in front of a Palestinian flag. This is a very small group, maybe about 5,000, but they get a lot of publicity, like when they go to Tehran and visit with the head of the Iranian government, okay? There are other Jews in the Orthodox community who have problems with the idea of the state of Israel for the same reason, but don't go to these ends, in part because many people feel that what these folks are doing, and what Jewish Voice for Peace, and we heard about them in a moment, that what both of them are doing is actually endangering Jews. Well, we can argue about that, but I'm just, Jewish Voice for Peace, Jewish Voice for Peace is probably the best-known Jewish anti-Zionist organization in the country. Again, they've gotten a lot of publicity of late. There's an organization called If Not Now, which focuses both on Israel but more broadly on social justice issues. Again, both of these are very attractive to younger people in the community. The, quote, organized Jewish community has taken a very negative approach to these groups. I'm going to offer an editorial opinion here, which is, while I'm going to leave out the Notori Carta. I'm talking now about JVP and not in my name. I think that we harm ourselves if we try to exclude people from our community. And even if we're going to disagree, I think we need to have conversations and find common ground. And the rabbis taught that the Second Temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred of one Jew for another. And I'm concerned that we're seeing some of this today. And we have to figure out how we can have what is a machloket l'shem shamayim, an argument for the sake of heaven, even over important and even, matters of life and death that are raised here. So we have to recognize that there are varieties of these views within the Jewish community today. Okay. Just a word about, see, I told you I'm rushing through all of this. Just a couple of words about Christian Zionisms. Again, I really like, I also use the term Judaisms. Another lecture, there is no such thing as Judaism, there are only Judaisms. Okay, so we have among Christians restorationist Zionisms. Now this goes back to the early post-Reformation days, European Protestant readings, and the idea that the Jews needed to be restored to their land as a precursor for the coming of the Messiah. And that is a very strong strand within some forms of evangelical Christianity today. John Hagee, Pastor John Hagee, if you know that name, would probably be a good example of that. Many people would critique that and say, well, it's instrumentalizing the Jews. That is, all we are players in the Christians' eschatological drama, and they don't really care about Israel for Israel's sake. They only really care about Israel to the extent that it's going to help bring Jesus back, hopefully later this afternoon. Okay? There are other people who say, I don't care about their eschatology. If they're going to, if they're going to lobby the President of the United States to support Israel, then it's okay by me. And we've seen Israeli politicians court these folks. Now, because I work with a lot of these kinds of people, it's important for me to describe their diversity as well. So you also have Genesis 12:3 Zionists. Genesis 12:3 says, I will bless those who bless Abraham and curse those who curse Abraham. And if you are a Bible-believing Christian, you read that, again, I'm being overly simplistic here, then as a Bible-believing Christian, it's my job to bless Abraham. And how do I bless Abraham? By fighting anti-Semitism, by supporting Israel, right? Then you have conservative, what I would call conservative American Zionists. That is, Israel is a democracy, it's an ally, it's there in the Middle East, it's protecting us from whatever it's protecting us from. It may not be religious, but you know, I as an American support Israel because it's an ally, okay? And there was one other thing that I was going to say about that, and it went right out of my head. And then the other form of Christian Zionism, and this extends beyond the evangelical world, is what I would call Jewish-Christian relations Zionists. I am a Christian. I am well aware of the history of Christian anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, and as a Christian, I want a different approach to the Jews and the Jewish people, and the Jewish people have returned to sovereignty. They deserve that. I'm going to support it. Okay? So these are all different forms of Christian Zionism. Again, I could do a whole lecture on that, but you only get one slide. Okay. Critiques of Zionism. There are anti-nationalist critiques. There are critiques of Zionism as racism, as settler colonialism, and as apartheid. Those three are, you know, sort of closely related to one another. Again, very briefly. There are people who simply don't believe in nations. But we should not have borders, we should not have individual governments, we should have one united world, okay? And one can understand how somebody like that might have an objection to any state, including the state of Israel. Of course, the problem comes there when that's the only state they're talking about. But as a belief, as an ideology, one can be an anti-nationalist and therefore anti-Zionist, right, without necessarily having negative feelings about Jews, okay? At least in theory, okay? Critiques of Zionism as racism. First of all, again, we have to say, what is racism? I'll read that in a minute. I know for those of you in the room, it's very, very small. It's the belief that a race, whatever that is, I don't think there is such a thing as race. It's a social construction, right? But one race is superior to another. Now, you do not find that kind of racial ideology in classical Zionist thought, okay? For example, you find in Nazi ideology, okay? What you find generally in, and I'm talking classical here, I'm going to problematize that in a moment. The Zionists wanted the Jews to be a nation like every other nation, right? They simply wanted to be equal. They weren't talking in terms of superiority, right? Now, again, we have to kind of bracket that in terms of the limitations of Western thinking on these topics in the late 19th and early 20th century, but it is certainly not the same kind of, you don't find in any Zionist thinking like a hierarchy of races that you might find there. This slide is from the Declaration of Independence, Israel's Declaration of Independence. The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefits of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace envisioned by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscious language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions. It will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Okay, it's a Declaration of Independence. It's an aspirational document, but if these are the principles on which the state of Israel was founded, is it racism? Now, okay, I'll just move on from here. Okay. This is a poster of Bibi Netanyahu, to his, on one side with half his face showing is Itamar Ben-Gvir, and on the other side is Bezalel Smotrich. These are both religious Zionists in the strain of the rabbi's cook. They are messianists, and what it says underneath there is Kahana Chai. That's a reference to Meir Kahana, whose political party, Kach, was outlawed in Israel because it was a racist party. However, these people are now in positions of power in the government, and they, I will say, they have a racist ideology in terms of their desire, of their views of Arabs in general and their plans for removing Arabs. Okay. Settler colonialism. Now this is, and I am coming towards the conclusion here really, is something that we hear. Definitions of colonialism as a general concept usually revolve around the control of one people over another for economic gain or to impose their culture or religion on colonized people. Now, there are two important aspects to this kind of relationship. The one is what's known as the metropole, okay? The mother country of which the colonists are the agent, okay? And then who acts as a sponsor, right? For whose economic, cultural, and religious interests are being advanced by the implementation of their own people on a foreign soil. And the second, of course, is the subject population, which is also related to the motivation of colonization. Now, Zionism doesn't fit this model. There was no metropole, no mother country of which the settlers were an extension. Jews came first from Russia, from elsewhere, including those Jews who came from Arab nations after the founding of the State of Israel, generally fit the accepted definition of refugees who were facing persecution, as opposed to colonizers. And of course, they did not represent Russian interests. They didn't necessarily represent the British interests because they had to fight the British. Now again, all of this is much more complicated than I'm making it here. But they sought to leave their proverbial diaspora baggage behind them and build a new society, in that land. Now, the Jewish settlers also didn't really include the existing population in their designs. They either ignored them, or they thought that they would, that those. And this does suggest certain attitudes, but that population would actually benefit from all of the wonderful things that the Jews were going to be bringing to the land as they developed the land and brought European culture and so forth. Again, that is not unproblematic, but it is different than this idea of settler colonialism. And finally, and here's the other thing, is that the Jews were not entering into some other land. At least in their own mind, they were returning to their homeland. And, so none of this, what I'm saying here, is meant to excuse the indifference of Zionists then or today to the existence of another people who have their own valid historical ties to the territory, nor does it justify treatment of Palestinians in the past or the present. I'm just trying to problematize the issue of settler colonialism. It's a highly emotive word. It's a label you can stick on someone, just like racist, just like apartheid. And here's another thing about it, though, is when you paint Zionists as settler colonialists, you're then subsuming them under white Europeans, right? So again, this is a problem. It's not now apartheid. This is another word that one hears a lot. First of all, it's important to understand that what goes on in the West Bank is very different than what goes on in the land of Israel, in Israel proper, as we might call it, okay? So, going back to the Declaration of Independence or looking at what goes on in Israel today, Israeli Arabs or, Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel who live on the Israel side of the Green Line, at least de jure, have equal rights. Okay? Again, it's imperfect, but serve in the Knesset, Supreme Court, access to education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of the things that would not have been found in South Africa. Okay? So that's not a great comparison. The situation on the West Bank is different, where you do have separate laws, separate administrations, separate roads, all kinds of problems there. The issue here is that, and let me see if that's that. No. The issue here is that, again, when you say the word apartheid, when one says the word apartheid, what immediately comes to mind is South Africa and the specific situation in South Africa. Not, I would say, the definition of apartheid that the International Criminal Court uses, which is a dry, legal definition. If I say apartheid, just like if I say racism, just like I say settler colonialism, I'm using highly emotive words. I'm putting on labels. And what this does, I would suggest, is that it stops conversation. Okay? It's not that there may be aspects of either Israeli policy or different Zionist groups or whatever that may resemble apartheid or may have aspects of settler colonialism or may indeed be racist. But when you apply that label to the entire endeavor, what you are doing is stopping conversation, demonizing. I would say, and again, this is an aside, we can go on to this on another time, the same danger falls in with the word anti-Semitism. If I label somebody an anti-Semite, I no longer need to listen to them, right? It's a strong emotive word. Likewise, the use of Nazi or other Nazi ideologies, right? You slap a label and conversation, debate becomes impossible. Okay. Anti-Zionism is used in two ways, generally today. Either opposition to the existence of the State of Israel, or opposition to the specific policies of Israel. And these are two very different things. I am opposed to many of the policies of the State of Israel, including a lot of those around issues of religious freedom, just to make a point here. But I certainly am not opposed to the existence of the State of Israel. The problem becomes, and I don't know if any of you have seen some of these little videos that have been going around of, someone saying, are you an anti-Zionist? Yes, I'm an anti-Zionist. Do you believe that the Jews have the right to a state? Well, yes. Well, that's Zionism. Well, and this is why it's important to investigate and to probe when people use this kind of terminology. What is it that you're objecting to? What is your motivation, right? Is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism? It depends. Are the Nature Carta anti-Semites? JVP anti-Semites? Someone who says, I'm an anti-Zionist because I don't like what Israel's doing, but oh yeah, no, I think Israel has a right to exist. Is that anti-Semitism? I know that there are some people who would say anti-Zionism is simply another form of anti-Semitism. I think that's too pat. I think it's more complicated than that. Again, in part because of the way people use words, right? And that's one of the things that we have to look at here. So I hope that I have demonstrated that there's no one definition of Zionism. Indeed, there are many. Jews, whether in the diaspora or in Israel, have a very different, do not agree on what Zionism is, and neither do Gentiles, right? You know, a Palestinian is going to understand Zionism through their personal experience and through the experience of their people, right? They're going to have a very different understanding of it than I am or than other Jews or other people. You know, this is one of the challenges here. Anti-Zionism is not, by definition, anti-Semitism. However, I think practically much of it is, especially if it ends up using rhetoric, language, that comes out of classical anti-Semitism, right? So I think you understand what I'm saying there. So so what is Zionisms? I wish I knew. You know, and again, this is where I talked about Judaisms as well as Zionisms. If I tell you I'm Jewish, you have no idea whether, you know, you're going to have to probe to find out whether I believe God gave the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai or whether I reject that altogether. If I say I'm a Zionist, you're going to have to say, well, you know, what do you mean by that? What do you think about all of these issues that Zionists are fighting about? If I say I am an anti-Zionist, you have to do the same thing. So here is where, when I look at what's going on today in this screaming match between people over Zionism, you know, you know, the idea that we should stop screaming at each other, maybe. We should maybe even sit down and really explore what, you know, what other people are thinking, what other people are saying, and making sure we understand what their points are before we judge or exclude. You know, these are things that are important. Now, there are anti-Zionists out there who are, you know, opposed, absolutely opposed, who are, you know, and who would never accept the existence of the state. But there are a lot of other people, again, who don't understand the history, who don't necessarily know exactly what they're talking about. These are the people, and some of them are in our own community, and some of them are outside of the community. These are the people that we have to talk to, that we have to, and not only to talk to, but to listen to. So I think that I will stop here. Like I said, are you now completely confused? And be happy to take some questions. Joe, should I stop sharing now?
Yeah, that's good.
There we go. Yes.
I lived at, is it on? Yeah. My name is Karen, and I lived in Israel in 1976. So I understand the socialism part of the Likud party, I think is what, and my ideal then, and I guess I was a brazen young person at the time when I went to live in Israel, and I didn't understand what was happening so much with the Palestinians, but I did meet some young Palestinians living in Haifa that were going to the university, and they gave me their perspective of what it was like to live at that time, being sort of discriminated against. And so my idea is, am I not a Zionist? I'm just asking that question. If I believe in a two-party state and to have the equal rights of Palestinians who live in the state of Israel and be treated, even though they might be in politics, but are they truly living in a democratic society that values their input, especially in the political climate that is going on today?
Okay. Do you want me to respond to that, or were you making a, I mean...
No, I have a question. Am I anti-Semitic, or am I not a Zionist because I believe in a two-party state solution?
Okay. When you say a you mean a binational state?
Yes.
Okay.
That they decide that Gaza and some of the West Bank becomes a separate state.
Oh, so that's a two-state?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, terminology. Two-state solution is a Palestinian state and an Israeli state living side by side. There has been in the past and continues to be talk of a binational state, that is one state with that has both nationalities in it, but it sounds like you're talking about a two-state solution. Right. Okay. So there are many Zionists who support a two-state solution. So I don't see any contradiction between that. In fact, there were people who would say that I have friends in Israel who used to say that the people living in the West Bank should make aliyah to the state of Israel. They should come back, into the land. The two-state solution remains the official policy of the government of Israel, even if it doesn't seem to be something that's being worked on at the moment. So, I think, again, there are so many ways to be, to understand Zionism and what would be the best way for the Jews to have a state and so forth. I think you can wear that label if you want to. Yes. David's going to bring you a microphone because we're recording this.
Just on that one point, are you confident that there could be a two-state solution?
Well, am I confident? I'm not confident. Again, this is my personal opinion. I think a two-state solution is probably the least bad solution. One of the people that I like a lot in talking about this stuff is Yossi Klein Halevi, who writes for Haaretz and for Times of Israel, other places. And what he says is, every Israeli's, again, this is a quip. Every Israeli's dream is to wake up in the morning to find that the Palestinians have disappeared. Every Palestinian's dream is to wake up in the morning and to find that all the Jews have disappeared. That's not going to happen. So now, what do we do, right, to live together peaceably, right? The various forces at work here, not only within Israeli society and within Palestinian society, but also, as we have seen in the international community, perhaps have different ideas. And, this is where, again, just speaking very personally, I like to support groups in Israel and in the West Bank that are working on coexistence. You know, now this is grassroots from the bottom up, right? But ultimately, you know, again, you know, maybe I'm a dreamer here, but ultimately, it's going to take people saying to one another, you know, we need to figure out how to live together. So, I'm not sure that the current political powers, another word with S on it, all of them are necessarily working in that direction or even see it in their strategic interest. So that would be my response. David, there's
Could you comment on the rising anti-Semitism in America and your thoughts on how we might eradicate it?
I'm not even sure where to. I'm not even sure where to start. Am I still on screen here? There we go. You know, I think that first of all, let's keep in mind that while some of the anti-Semitism that we're seeing today is specifically connected to Israel and to the current conflict, Israel and the current conflict had nothing to do with the people who were saying that the Jews caused the hurricane so that they could then, you know, make money cleaning it up, any more than when they said the Jews created COVID so that they could, you know, regrettably, anti-Semitism, and I may have said this the last time I was here, is woven into the DNA of Western culture, which means that it's woven into the DNA of American culture. And, you know, all it takes, you know, what is it that I was, someone was just, Toby was just telling me. I won't out, but anyway, can I tell this story about Michael? Yeah, Michael, about your cousin?
Oh, yes, yes.
So I don't know if any of you listened to the daily podcast on the New York Times. Anybody? One or two? Okay. Well, the host of the daily podcast is a journalist named Michael Barbara, who happens to be Toby's cousin? Nephew. Okay. A while ago, he did something that was critical of Trump. And Trump said something, not realizing that Barbera was Jewish, thinking that he was Italian, and, you know, said something basically about, you know, other Italians going up and, you know, and eliminating him. He then spent the next month in fear and, you know, finding different ways homes, different ways home, right? When again, and I really try not to pick on Trump, I really do, but when he says that if he loses the election, it's going to be because of the Jews, I find that frightening language. Okay? You know, at this point at this moment in our history where we are so divided, where our rhetoric is incredibly nasty, right? Whether it's specifically in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or more, you know, or other things, you know, the Jews are a target. You know, that's why there's security outside the door. You know, I am a program. I'm also the Jewish scholar at the Maine Jewish Museum. Yeah, or scholar in residence, I guess, at the Maine Jewish Museum. We have a program where we go into high schools and middle schools and talk about.
I wanted to have you talk about
about Jews and Judaism and anti-Semitism. We talk some about the Holocaust, but we sort of work with the Holocaust Human Rights Center of Maine, and that's really their expertise. But, when you go into a classroom and, you say, look, and I say this, when I go to synagogue on Saturday morning or on the holidays, right, there's an armed guard at the door. And that is something that astonishes, young people. So, anti-Semitism, I think, unfortunately, is always there. It just needs a catalyst. And that catalyst, again, it could be the war, it could be the politics, it could be the economy, it could be anything. So, the good news, I think, is that the vast majority of Americans, and this has been shown by poll after poll after poll, generally have very positive feelings about Jews. But, as we have seen in Pittsburgh, in Poway, all it takes is one person to create a tragedy, right? And I don't, I don't have any magic formula for that.
Would you talk about your program that you're doing?
Oh, sure. Yes. So the Maine Jewish Museum has a program called Delet. Delet means door. And we make ourselves available to middle schools and high schools to come in and do presentations. We're usually brought in as they are getting ready to or in the midst of studying the Holocaust. And part of what we want to do is we talk about, who are the Jews? What are Judaisms? In part because I think it's essential that people learn about the Holocaust. However, one of the things that happens when people learn about the study about the Holocaust, if they're not careful, they end up with an image of Jews only as victims. And so what we do is we go in and we talk about Jews and Judaism and Jews in Maine and the exciting stuff that we do, and I end up with a slide that says, we are not defined by those who hate us, and it shows a couple on a chair at a wedding, right? So that's something that I'm doing through the museum, along with our executive director, Don La Rochelle, and we've gone up to Sabattis, so I'm sure we could come down here to Biddeford and Saco. Just have to get the school. We've done mostly public schools, but we recently spent a couple days at Cheverus, which is a Catholic high school. So this is something that we're doing. And one of the things that Robert Putman, in his book American Grace, talks about is how important getting to know somebody is. Just like one person can break a stereotype. And the example, I'm not going to quote this directly, but he talks about Aunt Sally, right? Aunt Sally is a member of your family. She married uncles, whoever, right? And she's from some other group, right? But she comes from Thanksgiving dinner and she makes these amazing, sweet potato casserole. So all of a sudden, instead of being this, faceless group of strange people out there, all of a sudden, oh, Aunt Sally, right? It personalizes it and defuses this. And this is one of the things we've seen in terms of gay rights in this country, right? Going into these schools all of a sudden puts a face on it, and I connect it to Maine. I can very much talk about Maine. One of the things that I do, unfortunately, is show them graffiti from the East End Trail in Portland, where the water treatment center is there. They've got this one, the graffiti art. Over the past, I haven't seen any recently, but there was some nasty anti-Semitic neo-Nazi graffiti there. And again, you're talking to high schoolers, probably some of them who probably hang up down there, and you say, I was out walking my dog. Hi, Jamie. I was out walking my dog, And this is what I encountered right here in beautiful Portland. So.
Well, I just have to comment that I just have to comment that since October 7th, I've just been so amazed at the distance between the Jewish and the Christian community and understanding what was going on October 7th and what has been going on since. And how people that aren't necessarily my friends, but my colleagues that are not Jewish, are amazed at how infected I am by what happened October 7th. And it's just been, it's like, what, you don't know? Can you speak to that? And I think it's...
Well, yeah, I mean, I can speak to some of it.
Yeah.
Because, first of all, I think for a lot of us, and I have a hard time talking about this, so it's very deeply personal. You know, I mean, Hirsch, Paul, and Goldberg, everybody knows about Hirsch, right? So his cousin is a good friend of mine with whom I work on a regular basis, right? One of my professors in rabbinic school who's no longer alive, a Holocaust survivor, horrible stories. His grandson was killed on October 7th. You know, so another colleague with whom I work and who was a visiting professor in Philadelphia when we were there, and his kid was, and his son was killed on October 7th. So it's deeply, deeply personal. And I'm not sure that it's deeply personal in the same way for some of the people that you're talking to. Okay, so that's one thing. I think a second thing is that you know, whatever people were thinking on October 7th, it all changed on October 8th, right? It all changed as soon as Israel began to respond. And I think that many people have a hard time holding, and this is not a unique idea to me, but holding two thoughts in their heads at the same time. You know, that you know, one could object to or find problematic or whatever the way that Israel is responding, and still be sympathetic to Israel and Israelis, right? You know, I mean, I saw a figure the other night that and it, you know, and it's now out of date, that since October 7th, 28,000 rockets and drones have been targeted at Israel. Okay? Now again, Israel is disproportionately strong, right? Many more Palestinians in Gaza and in and Lebanese citizens, and you know, the stuff in the West Bank, which is kind of gotten out of control. Horrible stuff is going on. People are suffering, but Israelis are suffering too, and that often, and I think for some people that has dropped off the radar map. And the idea that you know, again, that you can't hold both Israelis and Palestinians in your heart at the same time and be concerned for both of them, you know. I think it's also, you know, and again, this is the zero-sum game of our politics. I also think that there are, especially among, say, some of the more liberal Protestant denominations, at least on the national leadership level, those churches tend to be very critical of Israel, passed resolutions, Presbyterian Church and Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, others. They have communities in, you know, in the Middle East, so, you know, they're brothers and sisters, you know, and again, you know, I come back to the difficulty of holding two thoughts at the same time and being able to have sympathies for more than one side, as it were. So, but what you are seeing has been reflected, you know, internationally. I forget exactly when it was, but around 400 rabbis and Jewish scholars, including yours truly, signed a letter to the Pope saying, hello? You know, I mean, and I think there are people really, they don't know what to say, right? Because, well, maybe you're feeling bad, but if I say the wrong thing, you might think that I'm you know what I mean? And so they end up saying nothing. But yes, I mean, there's been a lot written about sort of the collapse in some places of Jewish-Christian dialogue, interreligious dialogue around this. I don't know how long, you tell me how long you want to keep doing this, so. I see at least 2 hands. All right, so there's one there and there's one at the back. Or one in the back and then one, we can do them in either order.
I was wondering if you could speak some about the protests that we're seeing and what's going on in college campuses, and I'm particularly concerned about what our young people are not getting from whatever news they're getting. Because it seems like, they go to TikTok and all these other places, and they're getting news that's not helping them or not helping us.
Yeah, well, first of all, I guess we shouldn't be surprised that there is political activity on college campuses. Certainly there was none of that when I was in college. Yeah. Right? One of the things, I mean, there are a few, there are a number of things. First of all, it certainly varies from campus to campus a great deal. And I know, for example, that Colby, in part because of the efforts of some of the faculty there, including David Friedenreich, they organize discussions and so forth on campus, and there was very little disruption and so forth on that campus. There are other campuses where it was handled very well. Hebrew University in Jerusalem, interestingly enough, you should Google it and see what they did. They also handled it. But, here is, again, is it legitimate for students to protest on a college campus against Israeli policies? Absolutely, if you ask me. Absolutely. And, the other way around, right? I mean, is it legitimate for supporters of Israel to protest or rally in support of Israel on campus? Absolutely. Again, the question is, what is your rhetoric? What are what are your activities? What are you doing? Are you using caricatured pictures of Jews? Are you using swastikas to talk about Israel? Are you implying, as I have seen on, which is one of the reasons why I eventually just deleted my Twitter account, all of these tweets about how the Jews have won X number of Nobel Prizes, but Arabs have only won 6 or something like that, as if somehow that has something to do. I mean, that, my perspective, that's racism.
No, I'm more concerned that they don't even know Hamas from Hezbollah from the Palestinians. It's just,
yes,
it amazes me how much education
there is certainly
done out there.
Yeah, I mean, certainly one of certainly on college campuses, I think, there certainly is it's the kind of the protest of the day, and my friend is going, and I'm going to go too, and I'm going to hold a sign, but I may not even know really what it's about. I mean, that is clearly an issue. There is also the issue of who from outside the universities is organizing and supporting these things. One could ask that about both pro and anti-Israel organizations. Again, let's be honest here. The intimidation, though, of not, see, this is where it becomes the intimidation of Jews. Okay, if I'm a Jewish student and in the dorm, and someone tears the mezuzah off of the floor of my dorm room, they don't, I mean, you know, do they know where I stand on Israel or not, right? You know, again, this is what happens when very complex political issues are reduced to slogans. You know, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. Is that anti-Semitic? You got to dig down and see exactly what they mean by that. Certainly, if it means pushing all of the Jews into the Mediterranean, I'd say that's anti-Semitic. If it means, you know, freedom for Palestinians in the West Bank and equal rights for Palestinians and living in the land of Israel, so maybe it's not anti-Semitic. You know, I mean, this is where, again, the simplification into buzzwords and to labels and to slogans and to chants. That's C-H-A-N-T-S, not C-H-A-N-C-E. You know, if you, what you end up with is simplistic concepts, which very quickly devolves into name calling and all sorts of things. So I'm not really, I don't think I'm answering your question necessarily, but you know, I wish I had an answer. One more question. Hi.
Thank you. I was wondering if, particularly from your vantage point there in Portland at the museum and in general there, if you could speak to the recent decision by the City of Portland, Portland City Council, if I understand it correctly, to divest from and boycott any and everything is from Israel at all, to jump on that bandwagon of the whole boycott divestment movement as a city, if you could talk to us about that.
Okay. So, you know, I guess there are sort of two different things here. If I remember it correctly, and please help me out here, the resolution was a resolution to divest city funds from Israeli companies. And there was a list of those companies and so forth. One of the problems, of course, is that it's not as if... oh, I'm sorry. There we go. It's not... okay. The city of Portland can't simply decide that it's going to sell this particular company or that particular company. That's not the way their investments are held. So in that regard, it was completely a performative thing, okay? Secondly, my understanding is that the fact that this was going to be coming before the city council was not well publicized, and people only found out about it, at least outside of, found out about it that morning. I mean, we had actually just gotten back that, like, late that night, the night before, from Australia, okay, and we were completely trashed. And I wake up at like 12:30 in the afternoon, and I open my phone, and there's a sort of an emergency email from the JCA asking people to write letters, and I didn't read it until after the deadline, right? So there's this question about process. There is certainly a question about on what basis, what knowledge basis did the members of the city council vote on this. Hard for me to believe, given the process, that there was a lot of deep thinking there. you know, the Portland Chamber of Commerce basically put out something completely trashing the city council's steps. And then on October 7th, the city council passed a resolution, you know, sort of addressed to the Jewish community, memorializing the events of October 7th. So, you know, which is just a little whiplash there, I guess, some of it. You know, I'm tempted to say who was the foreign policy advisor to the Portland City Council. You know, you know, I have to wonder whether, now this is going to sound like a whatever. I have to wonder whether there was anybody at that city council, on the city council, who knows, you know, half of what I know about the history of Israel and Palestine and the conflict and so forth, and whether they had any of that information in front of them, or was it, you know, simply a very good political move by people with an agenda, right? And I suppose more power to them. You know, I've described it as you know, some very dedicated people enabled by a group of useful idiots. You know, I mean, again, I'm not sure what they accomplished by doing that. You know, does that mean that a city council should never weigh in on any issue, of any you know, international issue or so forth? You know, I don't know about that. You know, if they're going to do it, they should do it in an open process, and they should do it in a way in which they are able to get full information. I don't think that happened. So I don't know if that answers you or not.
David, can I speak for a second? Not that I know that much more than you do, but because I'm a Portlander.
Yeah.
So my understanding of this resolution is that it was very limited in what it asked the city of Portland, the city council, to do, and that their perception was that they didn't own any of those stocks, so no skin off our nose. But there are many Jews in Portland who are angry and speaking to the politicians and trying to vote them off the city council and all sorts of things that are going on. And this is very personal here, but I find such incredible hypocrisy in the act, because yes, it might have been no skin off their nose to divest in those particular companies, but they run the city on Jewish technology. Because if they can't use Google, and they can't use Wi-Fi, and they can't use their cell phones, and they can't use their computers, and they can't give out generic drugs, all of which have either Jewish pieces or Jewish technology in them, I don't know how they move forward. And that conversation is beginning to happen as well. So it hasn't gone to rest because it was a stupid move.
I want to thank everyone for coming. This conversation is going to continue because we have a reception downstairs after this, where you can talk to each other, people who've already spoke, or to Rabbi Sandmel, to ask them more questions. I do believe one of the best ways to handle some of these questions is coming to lectures like this, to read, and to educate others. Because as was said, some people have no idea what this is, just rhetoric. Our library is open. You can go in and walk around, see if there's a book that interests you to take out. We're going to be sending a survey out to see if there are people to see what else you'd like to hear, but part of it is also going to be, we'll send you a short bibliography of books you might want to read to continue your understanding. This lecture is going to be on our website. The anti-Semitism lectures will be on the website. This one I'll have to look again because I could not read what you're writing, and there's so much deeper information that you couldn't go into that I'd be interested in learning about at my own leisure. So, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I leave the meeting now?
We're all set.
Okay.